The roar of the battle had barely subsided when Sergeant Ethan Hale stumbled over the wreckage of the alien vessel, his heart pounding in his chest. The war had raged for years, humanity's coalition fighting against the relentless forces of the Chthar Dominion, a race of cold, calculating conquerors. But today, something had changed. Ethan wasn't here for glory or victory. He wasn't even here for survival. His mission, which he had been ordered to abandon, had become something far more personal. He had been sent to retrieve intel from a downed Dominion ship. Instead, he found her. Her name was Lyra, a warrior of the Chthar, but not one of their savage generals or ruthless commanders. She was different, a scientist, an inventor, whose mind had once bridged the gap between two very different worlds. Her blue skin, with intricate glowing markings, lay bruised and broken in the debris. Her breath was shallow, weak, but alive. Ethan could hardly believe his eyes. He had seen her face before, on the intelligence feeds, the woman who once advocated for peace between their two races, a voice drowned out by the Dominion's thirst for war. But now, lying in the dirt and dust of a forgotten battlefield, she was nothing but another casualty of a brutal war. Ethan had sworn to never let his emotions get involved in the war. But that was before he found her, before he saw the desperation in her eyes and heard the faintest whisper of her plea for help. Please help. He had been trained to fight, not to heal, but something inside him twisted. Against all orders, against everything he knew, he reached out to her. His fingers brushed her cold skin, his mind screaming at him to leave, to return to safety, but his heart rebelled. Hold on, he whispered to her, knowing how foolish it sounded. She couldn't even comprehend his language, and yet, somehow, she understood. Ethan had no choice. He had to save her. She might be from the enemy, but her life was a thread pulled by forces beyond their control. It wasn't about alliances anymore. It was about humanity's soul. He had to make a choice that would change everything. Carefully, he lifted her into his arms, wincing as his own injuries flared up with every movement. Bloodied and bruised, with the weight of their dying war pressing on his shoulders, he began to make his way back to the dropped ship. The mission had shifted from survival to a personal one. Rescue, escape, and protect. The journey back was a blur of pain and adrenaline. Every step felt like it might be his last. He knew they were being hunted, that the Dominion's warships would be scouring the planet for survivors. Lyra's life was a beacon to the enemy, a sign of vulnerability. The further they ventured, the more Ethan could feel the sting of their inevitable pursuit. He couldn't stop. He wouldn't stop. But Lyra's condition worsened with every hour that passed. Her injuries were more severe than he had realized. Her breathing became ragged, and her once glowing markings dimmed, losing the brilliance they had held in the battlefield. He couldn't even begin to understand her physiology, let alone heal her wounds. "Stay with me, Lyra," he begged, his voice hoarse, but no response came. Her eyes fluttered closed, her body too weak to fight. Just as he reached the escape pod, an explosion rocked the ground beneath him. The sky above lit up as Dominion warships descended, their weapons lighting up the atmosphere. Ethan's pulse quickened. He had no time. His heart raced, not for himself, but for her. With no other option, he sealed the hatch. Lyra was unconscious in his arms, her life hanging by a thread. Ethan couldn't help but wonder if this was it, if their tragic tale had already been written. The escape pod shot into the sky, but not fast enough. A Dominion warship locked onto them, firing relentlessly. Ethan could feel the impact of each blast against the pod's hull, shaking it violently. But he pushed forward, activating every countermeasure he could, praying to whatever gods were out there that he could make it. "Please not like this," he muttered, his voice cracking. But then, the impossible happened. Just as the final blast struck, Lyra's body seemed to react. Her glowing markings flared back to life. Energy rippled from her, disrupting the energy field of the Dominion's fire, deflecting the final shot. It wasn't enough to save them from the destruction ahead. The pod tore apart in the final moments, spiraling into the atmosphere, and everything went black. When Ethan woke, it was to a familiar, agonizing feeling of being alive in a world that had crushed his soul. His body was a mangled mess, his mind struggling to make sense of what had happened. He was no longer in space. The pod had crash-landed on a distant planet, an unknown world, far from the battlefield. Lyra was gone. Her body was nowhere to be found. She had vanished. In the chaos of the crash, Ethan's only memories of her were the faint glow of her markings, fading in the last moments of her life. He had failed her. They both had. But as he looked around, his eyes caught sight of something in the distance. An unfamiliar structure, untouched by war, its walls gleaming with the same markings he had seen on Lyra. Her final words echoed in his mind. "You saved me, but this is not the end. This is only the beginning." In his gut, he knew the truth. Humanity had not just made an ally in the Jthar Dominion. They had just become the central piece in something much larger than themselves. Ethan Hale had not only defied the odds to save an alien woman. He had started a revolution. Ethan staggered to his feet, his limbs stiff and bloodied, his head pounding as the remnants of the crash swirled in his thoughts. The planet he had landed on was unlike anything he'd seen before. Lush, vibrant, and teeming with life. But it felt wrong. Almost as if the land itself was alive, pulsing beneath the ground, resonating with a deep, ancient energy. He tried to shake the disorienting feeling, but his body wouldn't cooperate. His mind raced back to Lyra, the last spark of light, the fading energy that had wrapped around her. Where had she gone? Was she dead? Or had she, somehow, disappeared in the chaos? He needed to find answers. His heart told him to keep moving, to search for some sign that she had made it out of the crash, that she was alive. He didn't care about the war anymore, about the Dominion or his orders. Lyra's words echoed in his mind. This is only the beginning. It was enough to push him onward. The wreckage of the escape pod lay behind him, its parts strewn across the alien terrain like the bones of a broken beast. Ethan's eyes scanned the horizon, looking for any signs of life, any clue that could help him understand where he was, or why she had vanished. Then, through the thick foliage ahead, he saw something. A faint glow in the distance. A shimmering blue, like the light from Lyra's markings, flickering between the trees. His breath caught in his throat. Was it her? No, it couldn't be. Yet, there was no other explanation. She had to be close. With every step, the glow grew brighter, and the air around him seemed to hum, vibrating with an eerie energy. It was as if the planet itself was alive, responding to his presence. He pushed forward, not caring if it was dangerous or foolish. He had no other choice. Finally, he broke through the trees and into a clearing. There, at the center of an ancient stone structure, was a pool of shimmering blue light. The ground around it was marked with the same glowing symbols he had seen on Lyra, symbols that now danced in the air, swirling in intricate patterns, a language he could not understand. And there, standing in the center of the pool, was Lyra. Her body was different. Her skin glowed more brightly than before, the intricate markings across her limbs pulsing with an otherworldly energy. She wasn't just alive. She was changing, becoming something new. Her eyes, once a dull amber, now radiated with a deep, crystalline blue, glowing with an intensity that felt like staring into the heart of a star. Ethan, her voice was soft, ethereal, as though it came from the very air around him. "You found me." He stumbled forward, his voice hoarse with emotion. "Lyra, what happened? Where did you go? Why did you disappear?" Her form shimmered in the light, and she took a step toward him. Her body was different now, more alien than ever before. But her eyes were the same. They held the same warmth, the same intelligence, the same spark of humanity he had seen in her before. "I didn't disappear," she said, her voice reverberating with an ancient power. "I was never here. Not like you understand. This place, it's not just a planet. It's a living conduit. It connects the very fabric of existence, stretching across time and space. I am part of it now, Ethan. This is the beginning of what I was meant to do." Ethan's heart raced. "What do you mean? What are you talking about?" Lyra's expression softened. "I was a mere messenger once, a voice for peace between our people. But now, I've become something more. This planet, This energy, it has awakened within me the ability to shape reality, to bend the laws that govern the universe itself. You didn't just save me, Ethan. You've awakened all of it. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. She wasn't just some alien scientist anymore. She was something else, something beyond human understanding. And the power she had unleashed had the potential to reshape everything. Humanity, the Jthar Dominion, and the galaxy itself. You were right, Lyra continued. When I told you this was only the beginning. The war, the conflict, it was just the spark. The real battle is coming, Ethan, and we are going to lead it. Ethan took a step back, his head spinning. What are you talking about? Led what? The Rising, she said. Humanity, the Jthar, and all the other races. We are all part of a greater force that has been waiting for this moment. The Dominion wanted to destroy us, to enslave the galaxy. But they have no idea what they've awakened. This is no longer about borders or empires. This is about freedom. And we are the ones who will bring it. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest, his mind struggling to keep up with her words. But how? You're not the same, Lyra. You're something else now. She smiled faintly, the power around her intensifying. I'm still Lyra, Ethan. I've just evolved. But you are the human factor, the key that connects everything. Together, we can rewrite the fate of every living being in the galaxy. Her words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of something monumental. Ethan felt the pull, the undeniable truth in her words. But there was a darkness, too, a fear that gnawed at him. The power they were unlocking might destroy them all. The air around them grew tense, vibrating with the energy of the planet. Ethan could feel the shift, the uncontrollable force that was beginning to swell. I don't know if I'm ready for this, he whispered, his voice full of doubt. Lyra stepped forward, her hand reaching out to touch his. No one ever is. But we don't have a choice anymore. The universe will never be the same. We will never be the same. And with that, they stood together, two beings at the crossroads of a new galaxy. One ready to rise, the other unsure if it was worth the price. The battle was just beginning. The ground beneath them thrummed with an energy that felt like the heartbeat of the universe itself. The air shimmered with potential, a palpable force that seemed to stretch out from the glowing pool at the center of the ancient structure. Ethan could feel it now, the pull. It wasn't just the planet's energy that surged through him. It was something greater, something that felt like a calling. Lyra's form flickered in the light, her once solid shape now a fluid silhouette, constantly shifting, glowing, changing. She was no longer just the alien woman he had rescued. She had become a conduit, a bridge between worlds, between realms of existence. And he was standing beside her, a man who had been caught up in something much larger than he could ever have understood. Do you feel it, Ethan? Lyra's voice was soft, distant, as if it came from everywhere at once. The way the fabric of reality bends around us? He nodded slowly, feeling his pulse quicken. Every fiber of his being was alive, resonating with the energy that crackled in the air. It wasn't just the force of the planet. It was something deep within him, a connection he couldn't explain, a bond that tied him to Lyra and to the cosmic currents that surrounded them. I feel it, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But what happens now? What do we do with all this power? Lyra's glowing eyes turned to him, and for a moment, there was a flicker of the woman he had met on the battlefield. The human side of her, the one who had believed in peace. But that spark was now only a fraction of what she had become. The rest of her was something far older, far more ancient, and far more dangerous. There is no turning back now, Ethan, she said softly. You and I have been chosen to lead, to bring the galaxy into a new era. Ethan took a step back, his mind racing. This wasn't what he had signed up for. He had joined the military to protect people, to defend humanity from the threat of destruction. Now, he was being asked to reshape the entire fate of the galaxy. And Lyra? She was no longer the woman he had once tried to save. She was something other, a force in her own right. I don't understand, Ethan said, his voice thick with doubt. You're asking me to, what? Lead a revolution? Fight against the Dominion and every other power in the galaxy? Lyra nodded. Yes. But not just the Dominion. The old order itself. The systems that have kept this galaxy in chains for millennia. Humanity, the Jthar, the countless species we've come across. They have all been controlled by a greater power. The Dominion were just one piece of the puzzle, Ethan. There are those who manipulate the flow of energy, the very fabric of existence itself. And they've kept us all in the dark. Ethan's stomach churned. The Dominion had been bad enough. But now, Lyra was talking about something even darker, something older. An unseen hand that had been controlling everything. He had spent years fighting an enemy he could see. But if what Lyra was saying was true, that enemy had only been a distraction. We have to act quickly, Lyra continued, her voice firm, urgent. The Jthar Dominion was only the beginning. There are others, more powerful forces, watching us right now. They will come to stop us before we can gather enough strength to challenge them. Ethan clenched his fists, trying to steady his breath. He had been trained for war, but this was beyond anything he had ever prepared for. Who were these forces? What were they? And more importantly, what could they do to him and Lyra if they weren't ready? They're already here, aren't they? Ethan said, his voice sharp. He could feel it now. The pressure, the weight of something closing in. Something was watching them. Lyra's eyes darkened, her glow flickering as if in response to his words. Yes. The moment I activated the energy here, it sent a signal. They know we're awake. The air around them seemed to grow colder, the pulse of energy now humming with an unsettling rhythm. Ethan's skin prickled with the weight of impending danger. Who are they? He asked, his voice tight with fear. What do they want with us? They want control, Lyra said, her tone flat. They are the Elder Collective, a council of beings who have existed for as long as time itself. They manipulate entire civilizations, shaping the galaxy as they see fit. And they'll never allow beings like us, like you, to have the power to change things. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The Elder Collective? He had never heard of them, but Lyra's words carried the gravity of a truth that could shatter everything. These weren't just aliens. These were beings who had controlled everything. What do we do? Ethan asked, his voice steadier now, his resolve hardening. How do we fight back? Lyra's expression softened for a moment, and her glowing form seemed to settle into something more human, more familiar. We don't fight them directly, not yet. First, we must build a coalition. We must awaken the forces that have been hidden, the ones who are already on the fringes of the galaxy. Those who've resisted the Elder Collective in secret. Together, we'll form the foundation of something new. Ethan nodded, though doubt still gnawed at him. He had never been a leader, but Lyra believed in him, and he believed in her. She had always believed in the possibility of peace. Now, she was asking him to stand beside her, not just as a soldier, but as someone who would help change the course of history. He swallowed hard, taking one last look at her. Then let's get started. We can't waste any more time. The air around them seemed to crackle with the weight of the moment. Together, they turned toward the dark horizon, knowing that the battle was about to begin. But this time, it wasn't just about surviving. This time, it was about winning. The revolution had begun. The weight of their decision settled over them like a storm cloud, heavy and unstoppable. Ethan and Lyra stood at the edge of the ancient stone structure, the glowing pool still flickering with an eerie, cosmic energy beneath them. Ethan felt it, too. A pull toward something bigger, something inevitable. But the reality of what they were about to do wasn't lost on him. Change was coming, but that change would demand everything from them. You understand the risks, don't you? Lyra's voice broke through his thoughts, her tone both gentle and serious. Once we reach out, once we start this, there's no going back. The collective will stop at nothing to keep their grip on the galaxy. Ethan turned to her, his eyes searching her face for any trace of doubt. There was none. Only determination, just as he felt in his own chest. The same fire that had driven him to fight in countless battles for humanity was now burning in his core. But this time it was for something greater than himself. Something more than just survival. I've spent my life fighting for something, and now I'll fight for everything. If the collective is as powerful as you say, then maybe we need to take them on, full force. His voice was steady, unwavering. Lyra's glowing eyes locked onto his, her expression softening. I knew you'd say that. But we'll need allies. Many, many allies. The task ahead of them was monumental. They needed to find others, beings who had slipped through the cracks of the galaxy, those who had resisted the collective's power for centuries in secret. Lyra spoke of the forgotten, groups that had been scattered across uncharted worlds, living in the shadows, hidden from the prying eyes of the Elder Collective's influence. If they were to have any hope of defeating the collective, they would need to unite these scattered forces. The air around them hummed with energy as Lyra reached into the glowing pool, her hand trailing through the light, gathering the power that seemed to ripple from it like the pulse of a distant star. She whispered something in a language Ethan didn't understand, a low hum that resonated deep within his chest. The pool responded, its glow intensifying. "Are you ready?" she asked, turning toward him. Her voice now carried the weight of a leader, of someone who had seen the unseen and understood what was at stake. Ethan nodded, though a part of him still couldn't fully grasp the enormity of what they were about to do. But the moment Lyra had made that choice, he had already committed. There was no turning back. "I'm ready," he said. And with that, they began. Lyra focused her mind, channeling the energy from the pool. Ethan watched, his breath catching as the air seemed to vibrate around them. The ground beneath their feet trembled, and a strange, pulsing light appeared above them, expanding like the opening of a cosmic gateway. The sky above darkened, and Ethan felt a strange pressure in his skull, as if something was reaching out, seeking them. It was an invitation to the beyond, to forces that had been forgotten for millennia. "Don't be afraid," Lyra said softly, her eyes never leaving the energy swirling around them. "This is how it begins." Suddenly, the world around them shifted. The air became thick with the scent of ozone and ancient power. The very fabric of space seemed to warp. Ethan felt a pull, not just toward the energy, but toward the unknown, as if the universe itself was waiting to see what they would do. The first voice echoed through his mind. It wasn't just a sound. It was an experience, a sensation that filled his entire being. Who dares to disturb the balance? Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as the voice reverberated through him. He wanted to step back, to resist, but he couldn't. There was no escape. He realized then that this wasn't just a conversation. It was a test. The Elder Collective was watching. "We do," Lyra replied calmly, her voice unwavering. "We are here to change the course of history." There was a moment of silence, as if the voice was studying them, probing their very essence. Then, it spoke again, this time with a note of contempt. "Foolish mortals, you believe you can challenge us? You cannot comprehend the forces you seek to control." Ethan felt his breath hitch. He had expected resistance, but this was far more than he had anticipated. This wasn't just an empire or a government they were up against. This was something ancient, something cosmic, beyond the scope of anything humanity had ever known. Lyra's eyes burned brighter now, her expression hardening. "I may be mortal, but I understand the power of choice. And we choose to fight." The energy around them crackled with tension, and suddenly, a flood of voices filled Ethan's mind. The Elder Collective's presence was overwhelming, thousands of minds converging on him at once. It was as if the galaxy itself had a voice, one that held every soul ever touched by the Collective's influence. "You do not know the price of your defiance," a different voice spoke, this one colder, more calculating. "What you are about to awaken will consume you. You will lose yourselves in the darkness you seek to control." Ethan's knees buckled beneath the weight of the words, but Lyra's hand on his shoulder steadied him. "We already know the price," she said, her voice unwavering. "And we're willing to pay it." The air seemed to shudder in response to her words, and the swirling energy around them pulsed with increasing intensity. Ethan felt it then, the force of their declaration. They had crossed a threshold. There would be no turning back from this. Suddenly, everything stilled. The energy, the voices, the pressure. They all vanished, leaving an eerie silence in their wake. Ethan blinked, trying to comprehend what had just happened. Had they won the challenge? Had the collective backed down? Then, from the shadows of the energy, a new voice emerged, different from the rest, and yet somehow familiar. You are brave, humans. But bravery alone will not save you. We will be watching. And just like that, the energy dissipated, leaving Ethan and Lyra standing alone in the clearing, surrounded by the quiet hum of the alien world. But there was no doubt now. The fight had begun. The Elder Collective knew they were coming, and they would not stop until the entire galaxy was in their grasp. But now, so would they. Ethan turned to Lyra, his resolve hardening. Let's find our allies. We have a war to win. The eerie silence settled around them, the weight of what had just transpired hanging heavily in the air. The threat of the Elder Collective loomed like a dark cloud, but Lyra's unwavering presence beside him was all Ethan needed to solidify his resolve. They had made their stand, but the true battle was just beginning. Lyra turned to Ethan, her glowing eyes steady, reflecting a determination as old as the stars themselves. The first steps are the hardest, but now we know. They'll come for us. We need to move quickly. We have no time to waste. Ethan nodded, his mind racing as the enormity of their task started to sink in. They weren't just fighting for survival now. They were fighting for the freedom of the galaxy, for a future where no one would have to live under the thumb of the Elder Collective's manipulation. The galaxy was about to change, and they were the ones who would lead that change, no matter the cost. Lyra reached out, her hand touching the glowing stones beneath her feet, and the energy pulsed in response. Ethan felt the power surge through her as she focused, whispering an incantation in that ancient language he couldn't understand. The stones hummed, and suddenly, a brilliant blue light shot up from the center of the pool, illuminating the sky with a piercing brilliance. In an instant, the ground trembled beneath their feet, and the air seemed to part as something broke through the very fabric of reality. A ship, a vessel unlike any Ethan had ever seen, materialized before them, its hull shimmering with the same energy that flowed through Lyra. It was sleek, powerful, and unmistakably otherworldly. It was their way out, toward the next stage of their mission. We'll use this to reach the forgotten, those who can help us rally the galaxy, Lyra said, her voice filled with purpose. The collective won't expect us to act this quickly. We'll need to find the hidden fleets, the factions that have been biding their time. Ethan took a deep breath, his hand instinctively gripping the hilt of his weapon. Then let's go. I don't care how hard it gets. We're not backing down. Lyra smiled, a small flicker of the human side of her shining through. Neither are we. With that, they boarded the ship, the doors closing behind them with a soft hum as the engines powered up. The vessel began to lift off the ground, the terrain below them growing smaller and smaller. The stars above seemed to beckon, an infinite expanse of possibilities and danger, all waiting for them. As they ascended, the winds of their destiny began to shift, and Ethan felt that same pull, the weight of the galaxy's future resting on his shoulders. They were on their way to meet the first of the forgotten. They would gather them all, the rebels, the outcasts, the forgotten heroes, and together, they would stand against the Elder Collective. The journey was perilous. Each world they visited brought its own set of challenges, new enemies, unknown dangers, and even betrayals from those who had once opposed the collective. But through it all, Ethan and Lyra's bond only grew stronger. Their purpose was clear. The Elder Collective would fall. The galaxy would rise. And with every victory, they gained more allies, more strength, and more hope. They became symbols of a new beginning, their message spreading across the stars like wildfire. Humanity, and all those who had been oppressed for millennia, would no longer bow. They would rise together, but not without sacrifice. In their final battle against the Collective's forces, as they stormed the heart of the Elder Collective's power, Lyra's strength faltered. The ancient power that had fueled her transformation, her bond with the planet, the energy that had once made her so powerful, was reaching its limit. She had given everything, and in the final moments, as they faced the Collective's leadership, she was forced to make a choice. I can't keep this up, Ethan, Lyra said, her voice pained. The energy, it's tearing me apart. But you can do this. You can finish it. You've always been the human factor. The key. Tears welled in Ethan's eyes, but he nodded, his heart breaking. You're not alone. We're in this together. We always will be. Lyra's final act was to channel all the energy she had left, creating a massive pulse of power that wiped out the collective's forces, sending them into disarray. It was enough to turn the tide in their favor, but it came at a terrible cost. Lyra collapsed into Ethan's arms, her once brilliant glow dimming. Promise me you'll finish this. The galaxy is depending on you." With the last of her strength, Lyra smiled, her eyes softening with love and pride. And then, she was gone. Ethan held her for a long moment, the weight of her loss settling over him like a crushing wave. But he didn't have time to mourn. The galaxy needed him. They needed him to finish what they had started. He stood, his resolve hardening into something unbreakable. The Elder Collective had been defeated, but their reach was vast, and there would always be those who sought to oppress. But Ethan had learned one thing over the course of this war. The human spirit could never be truly broken. With Lyra's memory in his heart and the galaxy at his feet, Ethan led the charge. A new dawn was rising. The galaxy would no longer live in fear. The time had come for the oppressed to be free, and he, the last soldier of that forgotten war, would ensure it. The galaxy was free, but their journey, their fight, would never end. It was only the beginning.